Stay tuned. Ahead, I'll talk with Charles Hood about nature at night. Discover the hidden world that comes alive after dark. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and this is Some Books Considered. Naturalist Charles Hood lives in the Mojave Desert near Los Angeles. He's a poet, essayist, photographer, and field guide author. He joins us to talk about nature at night. Charles, welcome to Some Books Considered.
I'm so happy to be with you today. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, tell us about the reason you wanted to put this book together.
Whenever people think about nature, the default is a green grass or a meadow, blue sky, birds are chirping, butterflies. And that's fine. Of course, that's legitimate. That's a true aspect of the planet we live on. But nature, of course, doesn't stop when the sun goes down. There's 24 hours of nature. And if we ignore the nocturnal half, we're missing out on a whole lot of interesting action, so to speak. There's a lot going on that we would miss.
And you mentioned in the introduction to the book that this is one of the least explored aspects of nature, and that's this nighttime and darkness. So tell us about why there are creatures up at this time. What does that particularly serve their needs to be out in the dark?
One example is some of your listeners maybe have been on a whale watching trip or on a vacation in Hawaii, and they've seen dolphins splashing around. And we all assume sort of dolphins catch fish, although we actually never see them catching fish because they're usually too busy splashing around. And it turns out many dolphins worldwide are actually splashing around because their day off. They've been hunting at night. And so the question is, well, why are they hunting at night? Well, of course, they have echolocation, so it's easy for them to find things in the dark. But the real story is vertical migration. And if you had asked me a year ago about animal migration, I would have said, oh, yeah, the Serengeti, I've been there, or the caribou in Alaska, I've seen that. But actually, trillions and trillions and trillions of organisms are rising up every night from the safe and dark in the daylight depths of the ocean. They've been avoiding the light, and they're coming up to the surface because that's where the phytoplankton are, the little grassy, sort of the plant side of the ocean community that need sunlight. And to feed on the phytoplankton, the zooplankton, other things have to move up vertically at night, and then other things follow them, including squid, which means then that the dolphins to eat the squid are out hunting at night, and they're frolicking around our whale watching boat during the day because that's their afternoon off. And I never knew that. I think that's really interesting.
That is very interesting. I want to come back to some specific examples because obviously we can't cover everything in this book. So give us a brief overview of what readers are going to find here.
I'm interested in all of the different taxa. I'll use that very fancy, loaded, scientific word for taxonomy, TAXA, taxa. That means insects are as interesting to me as birds, as mammals, as mushrooms, as lichen. And so I really try to give my readers a tour of the globe after dark. And that includes migrating birds, but also then migrating dragonflies. That includes what we mentioned earlier about the dolphins coming and going with the vertical migration in the ocean. And even such basic questions that we can't fully answer really is, why do mushrooms glow in the dark? Not all mushrooms and not in all areas, but why do some mushrooms glow in the dark? Maybe to attract beetles and other insects to help spread their spores, so sort of a pollination kind of thing. But really, there's a lot of question marks about nature after dark. And I'm hoping some of your listeners will be motivated to come answer those questions and email me and tell me the right answer. Because I'd like to know, why do flying squirrels, why does a platypus glow in the dark? Why do flying squirrels glow in the dark under a UV flashlight? And I don't think we have a good answer for that yet.
One of the things I want to point out about this book is that in addition to the wonderful stories and information here, there are some beautiful photographs of these animals and insects and just the whole gamut of nature that we see at night.
Well, you're very kind to notice that. And one of the insect pictures that I'm happy with, a sphinx moth, was just in my front yard, which maybe doesn't sound remarkable to some of your listeners, but I do live in the desert, and I live in a middle-class tract home that really wasn't appropriately landscaped. And within one day of putting in xeriscaping, the native desert plants, I began to notice insects and birds I'd never seen before in my front yard. And so I was able to actually do some of the photography for the book right from home. And then others, I had to go to Borneo. This is in my air quotes. I had to go, poor, pitiful me, had to go to Madagascar, see them lemurs, had to go to Borneo, see those flying snakes. They didn't actually make it in the book in the end. And then I had some friends who were very good photographers who were gracious enough to loan me some of their images as well.
I'm curious about the extra challenge. Photography, good photography is a challenge to begin with, but photographing animals at night, it seems like that has to add a whole new layer of difficulty.
Well, one of the things this book tries to do, and I actually want to be a little bit of a trendsetter here, or kind of of an ethical boundary, is there are no deer in the headlights. We all know that expression of something that's sort of startled and frozen and terror and overly lit at the same time. And so I can promise, your listeners, I didn't put a single deer in the headlights because I actually went way out of my way to make sure that the flashes I was using, if I was using a flash, were heavily, I'll say, diffused, if you know that term, like there's layers of gauze between me and the subject, or they are heavily subdued in that the settings are down to 1/64th power on some of the flashes to really try to use the least amount of light for the animals' benefit. They're not getting stressed by me, but then also to create a more flattering kind of portrait. So I hope that every bat in my book, and there must be, 30 bats or whatever the number would be, I hope they all are attractive, cute, adorable little critters, and they're not the fearsome, like, werewolf with wings that we've been trained by society to imagine that a bat really, really is when it isn't.
One of the aspects right from the beginning of the book that you explore is mankind's relationship to the dark. And because we have often these negative associations, that's probably one of the reasons we don't know as much as we should about the other aspects of nature that exist in the dark.
I think society's been very good at training us to be afraid of the dark. And this seems to be getting more and more visible to me the older I get, so that even a new modern car, you go to get into it after dark, and all the lights in the car light, the dome lights on, and like there's lights at your feet, and like, come on now, really, you're making me an unsafe driver? So the reality is, when I get into a car, I know where the steering wheel is. It's exactly where I left it the last time I was in the car. I know where the seat is. I don't need a little light to tell me how to get into my own car that I've driven a million times. And what happens if I do that at night? I'm losing the acclimation that I had. I had some good night vision. I'm leaving the garage, going out to the street. I'm going to get in the car. And then the car just lights up. And I lose my acuity, my depth of field that takes a long time to regain. So we live in a very overlit, fearful world. If you don't have security lights, the bad nighttime is going to get you. And I don't know, if we went back 100 years, our great-grandparents, they were walking around fine. They finished their duties in the fields and they went home to the village and they just walked. They didn't have a big mag light with 9 D cells or something like that. They walked by moonlight. They walked by starlight. They just, they had to make do with the environment that they were in. And they smelled more. They heard more. They appeared, they got to apprehend the world in a broader kind of way than we are trained to do, hiding behind our Ring cameras and our flashlights and our high beams on our cars.
I want to talk more about some of the examples in the book. And one of them that fascinates me, because I've read different accounts of it, but it's these glowworms that are inside this cave in New Zealand. And what a just amazing experience it is to behold that.
I'm a big fan of aesthetic pleasure. I like good food. I like good sunsets, And so for those of your listeners who have a little bit of yen to travel and you're not, you have the means to make it happen, by all means, if you have yet to see your first aurora borealis, seek that out. It's going to be a good aurora year coming up. Aurora australis, the one in the southern hemisphere, is a little bit harder to see. But yeah, go down to New Zealand and go on one of the walking tours through the glowworm caves. And in my case, I live in the desert. I don't get to see fireflies. And so whenever I'm traveling, whether it's to the Midwest, whether it's to the deep South, whether it's to even someplace like Borneo, I'm just tripping out on fireflies because I just think they are an astounding manifestation of the divinity of the world, if I can be a little bit mystical about it. So I love things like that.
Another thing that was kind of made me think of it because you were talking about the dolphins, and we see them during the day, and basically they're just enjoying their time off. But we also think of some other creatures like jaguars and that sort of thing. You just assume that they're doing most of their hunting during the day, but that's not really the case.
Well, we think that for logical reasons. Again, people aren't foolish. We only see jaguars during the day because that's when zoos are open. Most zoos are closed at night. And then, of course, nature programs until recently had to film by daylight just because cinema cameras couldn't operate at night. The reality is jaguars, they do hunt during the day. That there are some prey they can forage that way. But the reality is they're going to be out where the animals are out that they want to eat. And so they're going to make use of darkness because they've got fabulous, they walk quietly and they've got fabulous eyesight. So if they want to catch something called a paca, a little kind of bigger than a rabbit, smaller than a calf, I don't know, kind of this little forest rodent-y thing, they want to catch a paca, they're only out at night. And so the jaguars have to hunt at night to get their pacas. One of the things about jaguars that some of your listeners may not appreciate is they're actually smaller than a tiger, but more fierce in the sense that the bite strength of a jaguar per square inch is greater than a tiger's bite force per square inch, if that makes any sense. And so a jaguar can actually eat a sea turtle, not by scooping out the innards through the flipper holes, but by biting the shell with its tremendous T-Rex jaws, crunch and biting through the shell of the turtle. Like, oh my gosh. It does give you pause when you're out in the rainforest at night. But as I joke in the book, one of my friends has been out over 1,000 excursions at night. And I ask him, how many times have you died? And 0 is the answer to that. There really is not much to, you want to use normal common sense, but there isn't nearly as much to be afraid of as we are trained to think there is.
Well, and the thing is, a lot of these animals are just as terrified of us as we are as them, so they're going to try to avoid you during the night or often during the day as well.
It's hard to find animals at night just because we make noise and we smell like what we smell like and we sound like what we sound like. And some people are dreadfully bad at hiking in a group and staying silent. Oh my gosh, some people cannot shut up for love or money. And so the quieter you can walk, the better your chances are. Some of the quote unquote professional mammal spotters, and for your listeners, people know about bird watchers. They keep a list of the birds they've seen in their yard or this year or in their lifetime. But there are mammal spotters as well that keep lists. And the top mammal spotters are using thermal imaging binoculars that read heat signatures. So if you walk into the rainforest at night and you scan with your thermal heat scope, you can see white hot blobs up in the branches that might be a sloth or a possum or a silky anteater. Then again, it might be a wasp nest or a termite nest because an active insect colony generates quite a bit of heat as well. So you have to use your regular flashlight at that point. But you can have all your lights off and kind of know your way around through a dark environment.
You have a chapter on things that glow in the night, bioluminescence and other things, glowworms, etc. Tell us a bit about some of the kind of the more unusual things that, I might not be aware of that are out there, putting out light during the night that is just amazing.
Sure, and it's something that's underexplored, which is true for lots of parts of the book, but I'll just give one example. Your listeners could get a little $10 UV flashlight. It's broadcasting in the ultraviolet spectrum. Get a cheap one. And lichen, L-I-C-H-E-N, lichen, it glows. Not all lichens and not all places, but lichen responds to UV light. And I have yet to find anyone who can tell me why. And one reason we know that squirrels glow in the dark, and I mentioned this earlier, is that some botanists were out looking at lichen and a flying squirrel glided by glowing hot pink, and like, what the heck is that? And it turns out we have 3 species of flying squirrel here in North America, and all 3 fluoresce under UV light. And there's some theories, maybe it's helping with taking in vitamin D because they're out at night or something. But checking other animals, turns out platypuses in Australia, they glow under UV flashlights. So we get our little $10 light and we go out to look for some lichen, which we could do anywhere, your listeners could do it in their backyard tonight if they wanted to. And then the other thing that a UV flashlight is great for is if you're in a more open habitat, the deserts or some of the open chaparral in the American West, scorpions, all species of scorpion worldwide glow under UV light. And they're a bright blue, purpley blue, depending on the light you have, your flashlight. And it's just fun. I think it's interesting to see them. And then you can also, at the same time, look for those flying squirrels if you're up in the right kind of mountains.
We normally think of plant life as depending upon the sun, which I'm sure they are, but we think they must just be dormant at night. There's not really much going on. But you also talk about in the book of some plants that, are very active during the night.
Yeah, it turns out careful studies, we're talking about, millimeters by millimeters, show that plants, and I'll use for your audio listeners, I'm now using my hands to pulse like a jellyfish, and they swell and contract over the course of an evening as the plant moves water around, and it's physically moving the shape of the branches, physically moving them in space as they repair tissue, move water, adjust themselves. And then at the same time, there are plants that realize there's a lot of competition during the day for pollinators. If I have a bright red flower, so does everybody else. And so if I want a hummingbird to come visit me or I want a butterfly to visit, it's kind of hard because there's just such a surplus of yellow flowers, red flowers. So there are those plants that have decided, hey, how about moths? How about if I change to white, change the shapes, change the chemical signal, can I have a nighttime pollinator and I have a lot less competition? Or in the case of the saguaro cacti in the American deserts or in northern Mexico, the saguaro cactus like to have a night blooming flower because it is not as hot at night, so the nectar doesn't evaporate. The whole flower doesn't cook. And what they are being pollinated by would be long-nosed bats. A relatively large bat, it's about 18 inches, sort of tip to tip, and they have a big snout and a huge coiled tongue, like a woodpecker has a coiled tongue, and they hover very accurately over the white blossoms of the saguaro cacti and zap their tongues down in there. They get their whole muzzle in there, get covered in pollen, and distribute it. And in terms of being pollinated, bats are a great dispersal mechanism because they can fly hundreds of miles over the course of a season. So you really have a chance to get your genetic material spread around there. Hummingbirds during the day, they cannot eat pollen. That's just not how they're built, but they can, they have to eat insects. But a bat at night is able to digest pollen. So they're getting the sort of syrupy liquid from the flower itself, the nectar itself, and they're also actually ingesting some of the pollen. And all saguaro cacti are pollinated by bats. I just think that's fun, and you can see them. They're if you go on vacation to Tucson, you can see it happening. And they also have learned in Tucson to raid the hummingbird feeders after dark. If you leave your hummingbird feeder out, bats will come. If you're wondering why is my hummingbird feeder always empty, it might be the bats have been visiting you during the nighttime.
Well, your enthusiasm for this time period is evident, and I want to point out that it shows up in the book as well. So if people are thinking about this book and it might be some sort of dry scientific thing, not at all. You write it in a very entertaining way that's also very informative. So thank you for that. It's a fascinating book. And I know we've talked about just a few things, but I know it's unfair to ask, but what are a few of your favorite nocturnal natural phenomena, whether it be creatures or plants, that you think people need to know about?
Well, I just want to encourage your listeners to not be too doom and gloom. I know there's a lot of bad environmental news right now, and it seems like policy is contrary to the environment, and it legitimately is contrary. But nonetheless, I can say, having been to 80 countries in all 50 states and blah, 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 my golly goodness, there's a lot of great nature still happening out there. It's not magically like it all like, well, we're going to go to Venus now. This planet's terrible. We don't want this planet anymore. It's going on fine. And 500 years from now, we'll still have nature. It will be distributed differently. It might be some different species. It might be species that we've said, oh, we missed the old ones. But nonetheless, nature carries on. And just to give one quick example, I'll try to tell this story briefly. I was in Gabon, a country in West Africa, looking for something called a giant pangolin. Some of us know penguins as these sort of scaly anteaters of the old world, but there's one that's never, ever seen. It's in the Congo. The giant one is bigger than a Newfoundland dog, weighs 80 pounds, almost mythical in its rarity. And I went with a group of naturalists and explorers. We hired some native trackers and we camped in the rainforest and we went out at night. And the guides were shouting in French, run, run, run. And I thought, oh no, we're going to get trampled by an elephant. The forest elephants are very cranky. They like to trample people, just smush them flat. I thought, oh, well, this is it. I'm going to die in the rainforest in Gabon. Well, it's a nice life. I've lived a long life. It's fine. But it turned out, no, they had found one of these giant pangolins. They want us all to come see it before it trundled away. So here we have one of the rarest, most kind of, mythical animals from the forest. And there I am, poor little old me, college dropout me, looking at it. And I'm thinking, hey, we do live on an interesting world, and you simply have to have the energy and perhaps the confidence to go seek these things out. So if you have a dream, you want to go see a narwhal, go see one. They're out there.
To learn more, the book is Nature at Night. Discover the hidden world that comes alive after dark. It's by Charles Hood. Charles, thank you for talking with me today.
You've been a very gracious host. It was a great pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much.
If you'd like to purchase Nature at Night, I've placed a link for you in the description below. And if you use the link, I'll earn a small commission, but it doesn't increase your cost, but it does help support this channel. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. Meanwhile, here are 2 more books you might find interesting. I'm Dan Skinner. Thank you for watching this edition of Some Books Considered.